Well, thanks, Dave. Dave eloquently tells the point of view, and you'll see in your tables you have some things from the no on group. I'm not from the yes on group, okay? So I just want to let you know, my name is Stephen Maggi. I'm the Vice President of Communications for the Evergreen Freedom Foundation. And among some of the many things we do is to get out our message. Our organization is all about the free marketplace and encouraging people. So first and foremost, before we even start, I got to say, the Evergreen Freedom Foundation has not and will not take a position on either of these initiatives. Generally speaking, though, we usually favor privatization, and we've made that recommendation a number of times in the past. But we're not going to tell you how to vote on this initiative. But we do think there's some information that you need to look at. You need to examine what Dave's saying and take a look at that. And then you have to look at some of the other questions we might bring up and then see what works best for you. Now, this is not a topic that I'm vastly familiar with, so I went and did a little bit of research and kind of talked to some of our folks in the organization and so forth, and just addressing some of the concept with government-owned liquor stores, okay? First of all, this concept of moderation. Now, that one I have a lot of problem with because the argument is that the state controls it because it encourages moderation, and the state gets a ton of tax revenue and so forth. Well, the moderation issue of that, in our opinion, is simply not true because every year we look at reports that are put out by the state and they talk about increased sales. Christmas time, they put some in-mall stores on because they realize the liquor item stores sell in the holidays. So they used to close on holidays. Now they're open because they found simply more revenue there. So to say that promoting moderation is just not true because it doesn't restrict a person's ability to get the stuff. And that's really the point. Now, you talked about California. I'm from California. I lived here the last 4 years. I like it up here. And I don't argue with any of those statistics. But do realize California is a different state. Look at the makeup and the various, the population base and so forth and where it's coming and so forth. It's a little different, So just keep that in mind when you are looking at those things. Now, again, how do we encourage moderation? Well, if there really wasn't interest in the government stores in encouraging moderation, we'd look at putting purchase limits to someone. But there are no purchase limits. You can get as much as you want. So, this is what we did in Prohibition days. And, from a national standpoint, that didn't work. Now, there's some argument that alcoholism rates are going to go up. And, the car crash, we talked a little about that. And we see that more as scare tactics. Nothing we've ever seen really shows that when a state goes from a controlled state to a non-controlled state, that there's a dramatic increase. One of my favorite ones, I looked at both sides of it, was where they said, nobody wants to see their liquor next to some Cheerios, okay? And I can see that point, but we have to ask the question, and this is really important when you're looking at all the issues. When is it right for the state to make a moral judgment about the products that should be available and in what context, and not in others? So, where do you want your government doing that, and where do you stop them? I think these are important. Like, for example, what's next? Some could argue, and certainly, they can look at me and say, boy, you know what? We got to do something about sugar. You're eating too much sugar. Trans fats. And so, do you want them to do that? If you do, that's one thing. But if you don't, you have to get an idea. This is a sliding slope. Where does it end, and where should we give government permission to make those moral decisions for us? Now, access to minors is probably the area I had the most difficulty with, because the state does have a pretty high rate of compliance in regard to selling to minors. Okay? So if we get the distribution sales out of the hand of the state, though, the state hopefully can focus all of their efforts instead on really what's the most important thing, is to make sure that alcohol doesn't get in the hands of minors. And because we have a better incremental rate than some states do, like California, the question becomes then, what other industries should government take over? And then it gets back to that problem. Healthcare, can government do it better? Mail delivery. Why do we assume that the government can do it better than the private sector? Instead, we recommend that the state can do training for stores, enforce a regulatory system that includes penalties, bad penalties if stores are out of compliance. So there's an interest for a store owner not to get nailed and lose their liquor license. It's better for the state to worry about enforcement, in our opinion, rather than selling of alcohol. Finally, the state auditor stated that teen access to hard liquor will increase by over 400%. And they said the theory is there's 340 places to buy it now, and there'll be 10 times that should one of these initiatives pass. Okay, a couple of things to remember. Number one, the state is already selling beer and wine, so the state can certainly set up regulations to monitor any activity. And All that simply means is, in some respects, people will have less to drive. People that want to get alcohol will get alcohol. They plan it for their trip. Now they don't have to go as long. I mean, you talked about the idea of 1 o'clock, and that is true. There's no question about that. It's just like people that go to ATMs at 4 in the morning. Usually that's not a good thing, okay? So, I mean, we have to talk about, one, personal responsibility, and also there's the possibility that we could just simply regulate when alcohol can be sold by the private side. Okay, and finally, we talked about loss of revenue, and it's problematic because the state will lose their extensive markup, and I have no argument with any of the questions with regard to the cup and so forth. But the argument is that if you privatize this, you're going to lose all the revenue. Well, reality is they still collect revenue through taxes. So once you privatize the distribution centers and the stores, they're now tax-producing entities. Not only that, but you get a liquor tax, you also get B&O taxes, property taxes, and any income taxes paid through the B&O system. So we see it more as a revenue-neutral shift from one income-producing entity to yet another. And then finally, you always have to look at who the big proponents are on this. Now, I totally agree with the income tax. I love the income tax. Would hate to see that leave. But in a lot of cases, the very same people that are pushing for an income tax are also against this particular thing, privatization. And these are the unions, okay? All the clerks at the government stores are unionized. UFCW is the biggest opponent of this, certainly by dollars. Those clerks would have to go to the private sector and might not be unionized anymore, which would then make the benefits that come with union jobs go away. So let me just close simply by saying, we feel in general, bigger government doesn't equal better life quality. Do the ends justify the means? I mean, if we can prove, for example, that government drivers get into fewer accidents than private citizens, does that mean we should force everybody to have a chauffeur? Something to think about. The ends do not justify the means. The fewer accidents mean safer streets. So I think this is a great thing. I want to thank you all for having both of us on. The whole point of this is that an enlightened electorate is going to make the right decision, and I think this really needs to be looked at from all angles and given a lot of thought. So thank you.
Outstanding. Okay.
Is it Jim again? Oh, that Jim.
This gentleman right here?
That's a good.
The other Jim.
Yeah, the other Jim. Jim.
It says in here that craft breweries and wineries would sort of miss out if this comes to ballot, it becomes law. I'm originally from California, and to me, it increased their market and increased their exposure. Because down there, they can be sold in every Costco, every Safeway, and so forth. So it gave them more avenues. So can I ask why you say this?
The question I want to make sure that I understand is you're asking about, let me grab that sheet really quick.
It says, craft breweries and wineries provide these initiatives would tilt the playing field to massive international beer and hard liquor industries.
Sure, I can answer that. First of all, I think that this part really, and then it talks about the 4,000 livable wage jobs right below that. And what I would like to direct that to is ballot measure 1105. Again, there are two ballot measures with that. And because 1105 would tilt the scales so heavily toward the distribution network, that's where it would impact the breweries and the wineries whose distribution network would be impacted.
And how would it impact?
Excuse me? Exactly, the smaller organizations, and because now, like Steve said, these measures are being pushed by Costco. Ballot measure 1100 is being pushed by Costco. Ballot measure 1105 is being pushed by Odom Distributing out of Bellevue. Now, part of the reason that there are two ballot measures, the distributors are concerned that if Costco and the big retail market gets a hold of it, they're going to lose a distribution avenue because Costco serves as a distribution network to a bunch of the smaller grocers around the country.